My name is Hiroto. 2 days ago a truck killed me on a Tokyo crosswalk. Now I'm dying again, slower this time, on a 4x4 wooden raft in the middle of an ocean that doesn't exist on any map I know. The system screen still hovers in front of me, pale blue against the morning sky. Us, the hook and hammer to gather materials and craft. I read it for the 10th time. My tongue is so dry it feels like a piece of leather glued to the roof of my mouth. My lips have split in 3 places, and the cracks taste like copper. But now I see what I didn't see yesterday. The ocean around me isn't empty. It's a graveyard of garbage, old planks drifting past in lazy circles, a wooden barrel bobbing 20 meters out, pieces of rope, scraps of canvas, a broken crate, a plastic buoy yellow with age. The sea has gathered all of it around me like an offering or a test. I grab the hook. The rope is rough in my hands, my palms already raw from yesterday's panic. I pick the closest target, a long plank floating maybe 5 meters away. First throw short. The hook splashes into water and I drag it back, heart hammering. Second throw, better arc. The hook clips the edge of the plank and slides off. The plank turns lazily and drifts further away. I curse out loud. My voice is a croak. Calm down, Hiroto. You used to be good at fishing games at the arcade. Same principle. Aim past the target, let it sink in. Third throw. The hook arcs over the plank, drops, and I pull. The metal bites into the wood. I haul it in hand over hand, the plank scraping against the side of the raft. Plus 1 plank. I let myself feel 1 second of victory. Then I scan again. The barrel is next. It's heavier. I can tell from the way it sits in the water. 3 throws to land the hook properly into one of its iron rings. Pulling it in nearly tips me forward. I brace my feet against the raft's edge and lean back, dragging it centimeter by centimeter until it bumps against the planks. The barrel is empty. Of course it's empty. For a second I want to scream. Then I remember. It's not the contents that matter. It's the barrel itself. I take the hammer. The wood is old and rotted in places. I split the first stave with 1 hit. The next ones come apart easier. Plus 6 planks. Plus 4 iron rings. A scatter of rusted nails I sweep into a pile with my hand. The system screen flickers. A new line of text glows into existence. Recipe unlocked. Solar desalinator requires 1 container, 1 fabric, transparent or thin, 1 secondary container, sunlight. I stare at the words. Solar desalinator. A piece of memory drifts up from middle school science class. Mr. Tanaka, the physics teacher, in front of a poster of the water cycle. Sun heats salt water. Water evaporates, leaves the salt behind. Vapor cools, becomes droplets. Droplets are pure water. He'd shown us a picture of survivors using a piece of plastic over a hole in the desert. The same principle works on a raft. I know what to do, but I need fabric. Thin fabric, something the sun can warm through. I throw the hook again. 3 throws to drag in a tangled scrap of old sail, gray, sun-bleached, but intact. 2 more throws, and I've got the broken plastic crate I saw earlier. The yellow plastic is cracked along one side, but the bottom still holds. Now I have everything. I work fast. My hands are shaking, partly from dehydration, partly from focus. I split one of the barrel staves down the middle to make a half-bowl shape. I scoop seawater into it with my hands until it's half full. The water sloshes, brown, green, and stinking of salt. Above the bowl, I build a frame from 2 planks leaning toward each other like a tent. I drape the canvas over them, pulled tight, sloping down to one edge. Under that edge, I wedge the plastic crate. The principal sun hits the canvas, heats the salt water below. The water evaporates upward, hits the underside of the cloth, condenses into droplets. The droplets slide down the slope of the canvas and drip drop by drop into the plastic crate. I check it 3 times. The cloth is taut. The slope is steep enough. The crate is positioned right. Then I look up. The sun is brutal. It's the same sun that's been killing me for 2 days. Now it has a job, but it's also still killing me. I can feel my shoulders blistering even now, the back of my neck on fire. If I sit here in the open while the desalinator works, I'll be unconscious before the first drop falls. I drag myself to the other side of the raft. There's a second scrap of canvas I pulled in earlier. Too small for the desalinator, but big enough for me. I wedge it between the mast stub and a rising plank, making a low, ragged piece of shade. I crawl underneath it and lie flat on the wood. The boards are hot against my back, but the canvas blocks the direct sun, and that alone feels like mercy. I lie there and watch my desalinator work for me. Time passes strange. I drift in and out. The sun crawls. My mouth is so dry I can't swallow anymore. At one point, I think I see my mother across the raft, and I almost call out before I remember she's still alive in a world I'll never see again. After what feels like hours, maybe 4, maybe 5, I crawl out from my shade and check the crate. Water. Real water. Clear, clean water, maybe 150 milliliters pulled in the bottom of the cracked plastic. It looks like the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I lift the crate carefully, hands trembling so badly I almost spill it. I tilt it to my mouth. The first sip is cool, slightly warm from the heat, but pure. No salt, no bitter aftertaste, just water. The way water is supposed to taste when you've forgotten what water tastes like. I drink it all in 3 swallows. I want to cry, but I don't have the moisture for tears. The system pings, achievement, first drop plus 5 survival points. I don't even know what survival points do. I don't care. I refill the bowl with seawater immediately, reset the canvas, reposition the crate. The sun has hours of work left in it. By the time the sun starts dropping toward the horizon, the crate has another 200 milliliters in it. I drink half. I save half. I find a small wooden cup from one of the broken bottles in my mess of materials and pour the water into it carefully. Set it under the shade. 350 milliliters for the day. Not enough to live well. Enough to live. I sit at the edge of the raft as the sun goes down. For the first time in 2 days, my head is clear. My hands have stopped shaking. The cracks in my lips still hurt, but they don't bleed anymore. I do the math in my head. Materials, 6 planks left over, 4 iron rings, 15 rusted nails, 1 working desalinator producing maybe 350 milliliters a day. Food, 0. Health, critical but stable. It's not much. 2 days ago, it was nothing. 2 days ago, I was a corpse on a Tokyo street. Now, I'm a man with a roof of canvas and a bowl of water and a hammer. I'll take it. Then I see something move in the water under the raft. I freeze. My hand finds the hammer without my thinking about it. A shape small, maybe the length of my forearm. Silver. It darts between the planks underneath me and disappears. A fish. I almost laugh. My next problem just announced itself, and it's a problem I can eat. Then I see the second shape behind the fish. Bigger. Much bigger. Long and gray and moving slow. The way something moves when it isn't worried about being seen. It glides under the raft and keeps going, vanishing into the dark blue. It was at least 2 meters long. I sit very still with the hammer in my hand, and I don't move for a long time after it's gone. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the gray shape sliding under the raft. Slow, patient, big. I lay on my back with a hammer on my chest and watched the stars. Wrong stars. Foreign constellations. I couldn't name until the eastern sky started turning pale. When the sun came up, I checked the desalinator first. 200 milliliters waiting in the crate from the night's slow condensation. I drank half, saved the rest, refilled the bowl with seawater, and reset the canvas. Then my stomach reminded me it had been 3 days. Not a hunger pang, a real deep animal demand, the kind that makes your hands shake and your vision narrow. Water keeps you alive, but it doesn't feed you. I needed calories right now. I opened the system screen. Recipe unlocked. Primitive fishing rod requires 1 long pole, 1 length of rope, 1 hook, bait. I almost laughed. Bait. Of course. The system tells you what you need, but not where to get it. Pole that I could solve. I dragged one of the longer planks toward me and started working on it with a hammer, splitting off the rough edges. Not pretty, not straight, but about 1.5 meters long and light enough to swing. Rope also solvable. Yesterday, I dragged in a length of rotted hemp rope. Most of it was useless, falling apart in my hands like wet paper, but the inner strands were still strong. I sat cross-legged and unwound the rope carefully, separating the good fibers from the dead ones. After 20 minutes of patient work, I had maybe 2 meters of usable line. Thin, but tough hook. That was the problem. I picked up one of the 4 iron rings from the broken barrel. Heavy, curved already in a way, but a full circle, not a hook. I needed to bend a piece of it into shape, sharpen one end, leave a small barb if I could manage it. I had no forge, no fire, no anvil, just a hammer and a wooden raft. Think, Hiroto. Same principle as the desalinator. Use what you have. I laid the iron ring across the corner of the raft where 2 heavy planks met, the hardest, flattest surface I had. I held the ring down with my left hand. With my right, I brought the hammer down on one section of it hard. The ring rang. The plank under it shuddered. I hit it again. After about 30 strikes, the iron started to deform. Not much. A slight flattening on one side. I kept hitting the same spot. My shoulder started to burn. Sweat ran into my eyes, and I blinked it away. After what felt like an hour, I'd managed to break the ring open at one point, turning the closed circle into a curved C shape. Now I had something I could shape. I worked the open ends, hammered one straight. He did nothing, just brute force and repetition. The other end I left curved, hammering it slowly into a sharper hook shape. To put a point on it, I dragged the metal back and forth across one of the rusted nails I'd salvaged, like a knife across a sharpening stone. It took forever. My fingers cramped. The metal squeaked against the nail, but after maybe 2 hours of work, I had something that could be called a hook. Crude. Lopsided. The point was duller than I wanted, but the shape was right. Curved enough to hold a fish, sharp enough to pierce skin. I tied the rope to the straight end with a knot I half remembered from a fishing trip with my uncle when I was 12. Tied the other end to the pole. Now I needed bait. I sat at the edge of the raft and looked into the water. Small silver shapes flickered between the planks underneath me. The same kind of fish I'd seen yesterday. They were curious about the shadow of my raft, about the cool darkness it offered in the bright morning sun. There were maybe a dozen of them, maybe more. But fish don't bite a bare hook. They need something on it. Something that smells like food. I had no food. I tried the obvious thing first. I tore a strip of fabric from my shorts, small, just a thumb-size piece, and tied it to the hook. Lowered it into the water. Nothing. The fish swam past it completely uninterested. One of them bumped against it once and turned away. I pulled the line back up. Sat there thinking, what does a fish want? Movement? Smell? Blood. Blood. I looked at my hands. They were already a mess from yesterday. Raw from the rope, scraped from the wood. I picked at a small scab on my knuckle and pulled it open. A bead of red welled up. I smeared it onto the hook, lowered the line back in. The change was instant. 3 of the silver fish darted toward the hook within seconds. I felt the line jerk, a tiny pole almost not there, then a sharper one. I yanked the pole up. A fish came flying out of the water, twisting in the air. The hook threw its lip about the size of my hand, maybe 200 grams. It landed on the deck and started thrashing. I stared at it. For a second I just stared. The fish flopped against the planks, its silver scales catching the sun, its small eye looking at nothing. Then I dropped to my knees and grabbed it before it could flop back into the water. It was slippery. Slippery in a way I wasn't ready for, and it almost squirted out of my hands twice before I got a real grip on it. I pinned it against the deck and brought the hammer down on its head. It went still. Plus 1 fish, plus 200 grams raw protein. I sat back on my heels, breathing hard. 3 days of starvation, and I just caught a fish with a piece of bent iron and a drop of my own blood. I worked the hook out of its mouth carefully because I needed the hook intact for the next one and reset the line. This time I used the fish's own intestine as bait. I'd read once that fish guts work better than almost anything else. I slit the belly open with the sharp edge of a broken nail, scraped out a small piece of gut, threaded it onto the hook, lowered the line back in, hit within 30 seconds. By mid-morning, I had 4 fish on the deck. By noon, I had 6. I stopped because my hands were cramping, and because 6 fish was more than I could eat in one sitting, and I had no way to preserve them. They'd start rotting in this heat within hours. I ate the first one raw. There's no good way to describe this. I'm not going to pretend it was anything but disgusting. The flesh was cold and slimy, and the small bones got stuck in my teeth, and the smell made me want to gag, but the calories were real. After the first bite, I forced myself to chew slowly, methodically, swallowing the meat in small pieces. By the time I finished the first fish, I could feel something I hadn't felt in 3 days. A base of warmth in my stomach, a small core of energy returning to my arms. I ate a second fish. Then I stopped because I could feel my body wanting to reject anymore. And because I'd learned in survival videos a long time ago that a starving person who eats too much too fast can actually kill themselves. I sat with my back against the broken mast stub and let the food settle. For the first time since I'd opened my eyes on this raft, I felt like a living thing instead of a dying one. I went back to fishing in the early afternoon. I wanted at least 2 more for the rest of the day, and I wanted to figure out how long the gut bait would keep working before I needed fresh. I lowered the line, waited a bite, sharp, harder than the others. I yanked up, and the rod almost ripped out of my hands. Whatever was on the other end was big. The pole bent dangerously. The line was so tight I could hear it humming. I braced my feet against the raft's edge and pulled, and for 1 second I thought I had something amazing. A really big fish. Maybe a meal for 2 days. Then I saw the gray shape rising up from below. It came up fast, faster than anything that big should move. A long, sleek body, maybe 1.5 meters, gray on top and white below. A wedge-shaped head, a mouth that opened, and I saw teeth, 2 rows of them, white and small, and angled inward. The shark hit the line like a bullet. The fish I'd hooked vanished into its mouth in a single snap. The pole jerked forward with a force that nearly pulled my entire body off the raft. I felt my feet leave the planks, felt myself pitching forward over the edge. I let go of the pole. The pole shot out of my hands and into the water. It hit the surface and disappeared in a swirl of foam. Gone. Hook, line, pole, all of it. I fell backward onto the deck hard. My elbow cracked against a plank, and pain shot up to my shoulder. I scrambled away from the edge on my hands and feet, pushing myself toward the center of the raft like a crab, not stopping until my back hit the mast stub. I sat there with my heart trying to break out of my chest. The water where my pole had been was already calm again, like nothing had happened. No shark, no pole, no sign that anything was ever there. But I'd seen it. I'd seen the way it moved. I'd seen the teeth 1.5 meters. That's not even a big shark. That's a young one, a juvenile. If I had fallen in, if my feet had left the raft for 1 more second, I would have been dead before I'd even understood what was killing me. The system pinged, threat detected, water predators, parameter defense recommended. I laughed. It came out cracked and horsaro. Thank you, system. Very helpful. I'll get right on that. I sat against the mast stub for a long time. The afternoon sun was hot on my face. The 4 remaining fish lay on the deck where I'd left them, drying out, attracting flies that shouldn't have existed in the middle of the ocean, but somehow did. I thought about what I just learned. 3 things, all of them important. 1, I could feed myself. The system worked. Crude tools made from garbage could do real work. 2, I had lost my fishing rod on the very first day of using it. I needed to make another one immediately, and I needed to make it stronger this time, and I needed to rig it so I could let go of it without losing the whole thing. Maybe tie the pole to the raft with a backup line. 3, I was never ever under any circumstances going to put any part of my body in that water. The raft was 4 meters by 4 meters. That was all I had. 8 square centimeters of wood between me and a mouth that was already cruising under my feet, waiting. 4 meters wasn't enough. I needed to make this raft bigger. I needed walls, or at least an edge I could fall against without tumbling over. I needed something to scare the shark away when it came back, and it would come back. I had bled into the water this morning. I had thrown fish guts overboard. Whatever lived down there knew exactly where I was now, and it knew there was food up here. I gathered the 4 fish and put them in the center of the raft, in the small patch of shade under my canvas. I rinsed my hands in seawater carefully, making sure not to lean over the edge any further than I had to. I checked the desalinator. Another 100 milliliters waiting. I drank it. Then I picked up the hammer and the hook and started looking at the water for the next piece of garbage to drag in. The sun was halfway down the sky. I had hours of daylight left. And the small thing in my chest that had been despair for 2 days had turned into something else, something harder, more useful. I was going to build a fortress on this raft, plank by plank, whatever it took. Because the alternative was waiting for the moment I lost my balance. The next 4 days became a routine. I woke at sunrise, checked the desalinator, drank what had collected overnight, reset the bowl, reset the canvas, caught fish in the morning before the sun got too high, threw the hook in every direction I could reach, dragging in whatever the ocean had pushed close to me during the night. By midday, I was breaking down whatever I'd salvaged with the hammer. By afternoon, I was crafting. By evening, I was too tired to think. I made a new fishing rod on day 4, better than the first one. Thicker pole, doubled rope, a safety line tying the rod to a peg I'd hammered into the raft, so even if a shark hit again, I wouldn't lose the whole setup. The shark came back twice. Both times I let go of the pole and let the safety line do its job. Both times I lost the bait and the small fish I'd hooked. But I kept the rod. Lessons cost something as long as you only pay them once. By the end of the 4th day, my haul was real. I counted it out on the deck like a merchant doing inventory. 2 more barrels, one of them with the lid still sealed, which I cracked open to find nothing but stale air. But the wood was good. 8 more planks of various lengths. A coil of decent rope half rotten on the outside but solid in the middle. A torn piece of sail almost 2 meters across. A plastic buoy, yellow and cracked. A short length of metal grating, the kind you might see in a ship's engine room. And the prize of the week, a wooden chest sealed shut with rust and salt, dragged in from a long throw on the 3rd afternoon. I left the chest for last. I knew what it might mean, and I didn't want to be disappointed too fast. I worked on it with a hammer for 20 minutes before the lid finally cracked open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had mostly held, a flint and steel striker, a rusted knife with a wooden handle, the blade pitted but still sharp, 2 short candles, a coil of fishing line, real fishing line, thin and strong, a small box of nails, properly made, not the rusted scrap I'd been collecting. And at the bottom, almost hidden, a sealed glass bottle full of clear liquid. I uncapped it carefully, sniffed fresh water, a whole bottle, maybe 700 milliliters of it. I sat on the deck, holding the bottle in both hands, and for a long minute, I didn't move. 700 milliliters, 2 days of drinking, easy a week if I was disciplined. But the real treasure wasn't the water. It was the flint and steel. Fire was now possible. I set the bottle down carefully and turned the striker over in my hands. A piece of curved steel designed to be held in the fingers. A nub of dark flint. I'd never used one in my life. I'd only seen them in movies and on YouTube. But the principle was simple. Strike the steel against the flint at an angle. Catch the spark, feed it tinder. I could have fire tonight, but I couldn't have fire on a wooden raft. Fire on dry pine planks in the middle of an ocean would kill me faster than the shark. 1 spark in the wrong place, 1 ember rolling into a crack between boards, and the entire raft would be a torch within minutes. I'd jump into the water to escape the flames, and the shark would have me before I'd taken 3 breaths. Fire needed a safe place, a place with no wood under it, a place I could control. So before I could have fire, I needed to expand and zone the raft. I had been thinking about this for 2 days already. While I caught fish, while I dragged in materials, while I watched the shark cruise lazily under my feet at dusk, I had a plan. I just needed to start. I started the next morning. The expansion came first. I lashed 2 of the new heavy planks to the eastern edge of the raft, extending it outward by about a meter. Then 2 more planks running perpendicular, tying the whole thing into a rough frame, then planking across the top. Boards laid tight, hammered down with the proper nails from the chest. The new section creaked when I stood on it. I didn't trust it yet, but it held my weight. I did the same on the western side. By the end of the first day of expansion, I had pushed the raft from 4 meters by 4 meters out to about 6 by 5. Not much, but the extra surface area was already enough to start dividing the space into zones. I spent the second day on the southern side. By evening, the raft was approximately 8 meters by 6. It looked completely different now. It looked like something somebody had built on purpose, instead of something somebody had been dropped onto. Then I started zoning. Zone A, the kitchen. I picked the corner farthest from where I slept, the southwest corner where the prevailing wind would carry smoke away from the rest of the raft. I built up a thick base of doubled planks. Then, on top of that, I laid the metal grating I'd salvaged. Below the grating, I packed in a layer of wet sand I'd shaken out of one of the empty barrels where it had been used as ballast. The sand was the key. It would absorb heat and protect the wood underneath from any embers that fell through the grating. On top of the grating, I built a small ring of stones, chunks of a broken ceramic crock from the chest, plus a few flat pieces of metal hammered into shape. A primitive hearth, crude, ugly, dangerous if I wasn't careful, but functional. I tested it that evening. I took a small handful of dry, shredded fabric. The inside of the rotted rope I'd been unwinding fluffed up into a nest of tinder. I struck the flint against the steel. The first 3 strikes did nothing. The 4th produced a single bright spark that died before it touched the tinder. The 5th, the 6th, the 7th sparks, but no catch. On the 8th strike, a spark landed in the rope fluff and held. I bent down close and blew on it, gentle, the way I'd seen people do in videos. The spark crawled. Then it caught. A tiny orange flame bloomed in the rope fluff no bigger than my thumb. I added a sliver of dry plank, then another, then a small piece of broken barrel stave. The flame grew. Within 5 minutes, I had a real fire going on the metal grating, the smoke rising up and being pulled away by the evening wind toward the empty horizon. I cooked a fish. I gutted it with a rusted knife, skewered it on a thin, sharpened stick, held it over the fire for about 4 minutes, turning it slowly, watching the white flesh go from translucent to opaque. The skin blackened on one side, some of the meat dripped fat into the flames, and the fat hissed, and the smell of cooking fish hit me like a hammer to the chest. I sat down on the planks beside my fire and ate it with my hands. I'm not going to be poetic about this. It was a small fish, badly cooked, eaten with my fingers on a wooden raft in the middle of nowhere. But it was hot. It was the first hot food I'd had since dying, and the difference between raw fish and cooked fish, the difference between cold dead meat and a meal, is the difference between an animal and a person. I sat by the fire until it died down, and then I banked the coals carefully under a layer of sand to keep them alive for the morning. Zone B, the desalinator station. I spent half a day rebuilding the desalinator on a raised platform on the eastern edge. 2 of them now parallel, twice the surface area, twice the output, about 700 milliliters per day if the sun was full. I built a small wooden frame to hold the collection crates so they wouldn't tip in the swell. I built a canvas roof over the whole station to keep rain when it eventually came from contaminating the system with a separate channel to direct rainwater into a 3rd container. Every drop counts. Zone C, the sleeping area. This one I cared about. I picked the spot near the center of the raft where the boards were thickest and most stable. I built up a low platform just 2 layers of planks above the main deck, maybe 10 centimeters of clearance, so I wouldn't be sleeping directly on cold, wet wood. On top of the platform, I laid a stretched-out piece of canvas, doubled over. It was a bed in the same way that a stone is a chair, but it was off the deck. It was mine. It had a place. Above it, I rigged a low canvas roof slanted so any water would run off to the side, secured at 4 corners. A roof. After a week of nothing, that night I lay down on the canvas and pulled a second piece of cloth over me as a blanket and looked up at the underside of my new shelter and felt something I had not felt since the truck. I felt like I had a place to sleep instead of a place to die. Zone D, the workshop. The 4th corner I made into a workspace. I dragged my pile of materials there and organized it for the first time. Planks in one stack sorted by length. iron pieces in a small pile, nails in an empty cup from the chest, rope coiled, cloth folded. The hammer hung from a nail driven into the mast stub. The knife I kept on me at all times now, tucked into the waistband of my shorts. By the end of the third day of work, the raft was something else entirely. It had zones. It had purpose. It had a kitchen, a water station, a place to sleep, a place to work. It had a fire that I could rebuild every morning from the banked coals. It had a roof over my head and a meal in my stomach and a routine. That night, I sat by the dying fire with a piece of cooked fish in my hand and looked out across my 8x6 meter kingdom. And I thought for the first time, not how do I survive tomorrow, but how do I make tomorrow easier? It was a small thought, but it was a different kind of thought. The thought of someone who wasn't just running from death anymore. The thought of someone building a life. I went to sleep on my canvas bed under my canvas roof. In the middle of the night, I woke up. Something had touched the raft, not hit it, touched it. A long, slow scrape along one of the side planks. The kind of scrape something makes when it's running its body along an edge to feel for what's there. The sound was unmistakable in the silence. Long, deliberate, then a pause, then again on a different plank. The shark was checking my walls. I lay very still on my canvas bed and listened. The scrape came one more time, then nothing. The water lapped against the planks the way it always lapped. The wind moved across the canvas above my head. The fire crackled faintly under its sand cover. I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, when the sun was up, I went to the side of the raft where I'd heard the scraping. 2 of the planks had fresh marks on them, long parallel grooves where something with rough skin had rubbed against the wood. I traced one of the grooves with my finger. It was deep enough that I could feel the splintered edge. The shark was bigger than I'd thought. The marks were spaced far apart. Whatever had brushed against my raft last night was longer than the 1.5 meters I'd seen on day 3. I stood up and looked out at the water. It was calm in the morning light, empty, innocent. I looked up at the sky. A black dot was moving against the blue, very far away, circling slowly, coming closer. A bird. The first living thing I had seen in this world that wasn't a fish or a shark. I shaded my eyes with my hand and watched it come. The bird circled for almost 2 hours. I sat on the edge of the kitchen platform with my hand shading my eyes and watched it. At first it was just a black dot against the pale morning sky, drifting in lazy arcs, maybe a kilometer up. Then the arcs got tighter. The dot got bigger. By the time the sun was high, I could see what it was. A large albatross, white-bodied with dark wings, the kind of seabird that lives its whole life over the ocean and only touches land to breed. But this one was wrong. It was flying badly. One wing wasn't moving the way the other was. Every time it banked, I could see the right wing trailing slightly, hitching at the top of the stroke. It kept losing altitude and then catching the wind to climb back up, and each climb cost it more than the last. By noon, it was barely 50 meters above the water. By the time the sun started bending toward afternoon, it was so low that I could see the dark feathers on its underside, the long, curved beak, the black eyes scanning the surface for anything to land on. It saw the raft. It made one final circle, wide, exhausted, and then came in. The landing was bad. It tried to slow itself with its wings, and one of them folded the wrong way, and it half fell, half glided onto the eastern edge of the raft, hit the planks hard, and tumbled across the wood until it stopped against the base of the desalinator station. Feathers everywhere, one leg sticking out at an angle. The right wing completely split out, twisted near the shoulder. I didn't move for a long moment. The bird didn't move either. I thought it was dead. Then its chest heaved once, twice. The black eye opened and found me. We looked at each other. The bird was big, bigger than I thought from a distance. Wingspan probably more than 2 meters when it had been spread. Body the size of a small dog. The kind of animal that on land would have weighed maybe 4 kilos, maybe 5, maybe 3 kilos of meat under those feathers. The thought arrived in my head before I could stop it. 3 kilos of meat. Real protein. After a week of eating small fish, 2 at a time, 3 kilos of bird meat would be a feast. I could smoke half of it, eat half tonight, and not have to fish for 2 days. I had the rusted knife at my waist. I could be on top of the bird in 3 steps. It was injured, it couldn't fly, it probably couldn't even fight. The whole thing would take 10 seconds. I didn't move, not because of any noble feeling, just calculation. I sat on the platform with my hands still up to shade my eyes, and I did the math the way I'd been doing every other piece of math on this raft for a week. Option 1, kill it now. 2 to 3 kilos of meat saves me 2 days of fishing. After that, it's gone. Option 2, try to keep it alive. Cost, maybe 1 fish per day, possibly 2 while it's recovering. Risk, it dies anyway and I get nothing, or it recovers and flies away and I get nothing. Reward if it works. A bird that can fly. A bird that can see from the air. A bird that can scout for floating debris I can't see from the deck. A bird that can find things kilometers away that I would never find on my own. The first option was guaranteed. The second was a gamble. But the second one paid in something I couldn't get from any number of fish. I needed eyes. I lowered my hands slowly. I stood up, slow, careful, the way you move around a frightened animal. The bird's eye tracked me. It tried to scrabble backward with its one good leg and got nowhere. Its beak opened, and a hoarse, exhausted sound came out. Not really a cry, more like a warning rasp. Stay away. I stayed where I was. I went to my workshop corner instead and picked up one of the small fish from this morning's catch. I'd been planning to cook it for lunch. I cut it in half with the knife. Clean strokes, slow, so the bird could see what I was doing. And then I crouched down and slid 1/2 across the planks toward it, stopped about 1 meter away. The bird watched the fish, then it watched me, then the fish again. It didn't move. I backed away to the kitchen platform and sat down where I'd been before. I didn't look at the bird directly. I knew enough about animals to know that staring at one is a threat. Half an hour passed. The bird hadn't touched the fish. The sun was starting to go down. I tried a different approach. I picked up the second half of the fish and chewed it in my own mouth for a while until the flesh was broken down into a soft pulp. Disgusting. But I'd seen mother birds feed their chicks like this in nature documentaries. Maybe this was something it would recognize. I spat the pulp into my palm and crawled forward on my hands and knees slowly until I was about a body's length from the bird. I set the pulp down in front of it, then I backed away. This time the bird stretched its neck out, sniffed at the pulp, pecked at it once hesitantly, then again, and the second peck was real. It ate the whole pulp in 3 jerky motions, and then looked back up at me with that black eye like it was demanding more. I made another pulp, brought it closer this time. The bird ate it from a 1/2 meter away. By sunset it had eaten an entire small fish in mashed form from my hand. I named it that evening, while I sat by the fire and watched it from across the deck. I wanted to call it something simple, something I could shout if I needed to. The Japanese word for albatross is audi, which literally means fool bird because they're so easy to catch on land. That was too long and too rude, so I just looked at it, sitting there with its lopsided wing and its scowling face, and I said the first short name that came into my head, Kami. The bird turned its head at the sound. Yeah, I know, I said out loud. K means turtle. You're not a turtle. I don't care. The bird made a low rasping noise that might have been agreement or might have been a curse. I decided it was agreement. The next 4 days I learned a lot about Kay. Kimmy was not grateful. That was the first thing I had expected. Stupidly, that an animal whose life I was saving would show some kind of trust, some kind of softening. Kame did not soften. Kame ate the fish I gave it, and then the moment I turned my back, hopped over to my fish storage corner and tried to steal another one. When I caught it in the act and shouted, it gave me a look that I can only describe as outraged, as if I were the one in the wrong for keeping food away from it. Kame was loud whenever I did something it didn't like. Moved a piece of canvas, repositioned a plank, banked the fire wrong. It would let out a hoarse, complaining cry from wherever it was sitting. The cry sounded exactly like an old man complaining about young people. I started talking back to it. Yes, Kane. I'm moving the canvas. The canvas needed to move. Hoarse rasp. No, Kane. I'm not interested in your opinion. Louder rasp. C was afraid of water. This was the strangest thing about it, given that it was a seabird. It refused to go anywhere near the edges of the raft. Whenever I worked at the borders, fishing, throwing the hook, Kame would retreat to the dead center of the deck and watch me with what I now recognized as nervous suspicion. I think it had nearly drowned at some point. Maybe whatever broke its wing also dropped it in the water, and it had only barely made it out. Whatever happened, Kane did not trust the sea. Kane slept by the fire. The first night, it tried to sleep on the desalinator station and shivered all night in the wind. The second night, after I'd gone to bed, I heard its claws on the planks. Hop, 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 and then a soft rustling as it settled itself near the kitchen where the banked coals were still warm under their sand cover. Every night after that, it slept there, head tucked under its good wing, body angled toward the warmth. By day 4, the wing was healing. Not straight. It would never be straight, but the joint had set into something that worked. Kame started testing it. Short hops at first, just stretching, then a few hard flaps that lifted it off the deck for a second before it dropped back down. By day 5, it could glide a couple of meters. By day 6, it made its first real flight, a clumsy, wobbling launch from the kitchen platform that took it in a low arc out over the water and back to the western edge of the raft. It landed badly and looked at me like I had personally embarrassed it. You did fine, I told it. Try again. It tried again. By day 7, Kame could fly properly. The right wing still hitched at the top of every stroke, and its turns were lopsided, but it could climb, it could glide, it could circle, it could go up. That was the morning I started getting paid back for the fish. Kane took off from the kitchen platform at sunrise, climbed in a slow spiral until it was maybe 100 meters above the raft, and then drifted west on the wind. It was gone for almost an hour. I started to wonder if it was ever coming back, if the deal was off, if it had decided that freedom was better than my hand-fed fish pulp and my warm sand. Then I saw it coming back with purpose. It was flying in a straight line fast, and when it reached the raft, it didn't land. It circled overhead and made a series of harsh, urgent calls, then peeled off and flew west again, maybe 30 meters out. Then it banked and flew back, calling. It wanted me to follow. I climbed onto the raised sleeping platform, the highest point on the raft, and looked west. In the distance, maybe half a kilometer out, there was something dark on the water, a patch of debris, bigger than anything I had near me, a real cluster, something the size of a small car drifting on the surface. I would not have seen it from deck level. The horizon would have hidden it. From the platform with the sun behind me, I could just barely make out the shape. Kame had flown up. Kame had seen what I couldn't see. Came in to come back to tell me the deal was working. I spent the next 2 hours rigging a paddle. I hadn't built one yet because the raft was too heavy to row in any meaningful way, and I had nowhere to go. But now I had somewhere to go half a kilometer west before the current pulled the debris field away. I lashed a flat plank to a long pole, made a clumsy oar, and then I worked the raft slowly across the open water with cameling overhead and screeching what I'm pretty sure were instructions. It took me almost 3 hours to reach the debris field. By the time I got there, my arms were shaking and my palms were bleeding through new blisters. But the field was real, and it was full. Half-broken planks, a long piece of mast, 2 more barrels, a tangle of rope, a torn fishing net bigger than anything I had, and in the middle of it all, half submerged, but riding the swell, a large wooden barrel, sealed, heavy, big as a man's chest. I hooked it and dragged it toward the raft with everything I had left. It bumped against my boards, and I stopped, panting, holding the rope, looking down at my prize. I had no idea what was inside it. I could already feel that it was full of something, dense, packed, not liquid. It could be anything. Garbage, dead meat, stones, or something I needed. Above me Kame circled once and then settled on the kitchen platform with a satisfied rasp. "All right," I said to the barrel. "Let's see what you've got." I picked up the hammer. The barrel was heavier than anything I'd dragged onto the raft so far. I worked the lid for almost 20 minutes. Salt had glued it shut, and the wood around the seal was swollen tight. I hammered. I cried. I cursed. Came watch from the kitchen platform with a bored expression of an old man watching a child fail at a simple task. The lid finally cracked. I pulled it back and looked inside. Packets. Dozens of them. Dozens. Small paper packets sealed in waxed cloth, stacked in layers packed tight against the inside of the barrel. Most of the top layer was ruined, soaked through. The paper turned to pulp. The contents inside reduced to a black mush. But the second layer down had held. The waxed cloth had done its job. The packets in the middle of the barrel were dry. I picked one up with shaking fingers. The paper was brittle but intact. I tore one corner. Small dark seeds spilled into my palm. I stared at them for a long time. I knew what they were before my brain caught up to my eyes. Tomato seeds, the kind I had seen my grandmother shake out of a paper envelope into a clay pot every spring on her balcony in Yokohama 30 years ago and a lifetime away. I went through the rest of the barrel. Tomatoes, cucumbers, beans of 3 different kinds, daikon, spinach, some kind of leafy green I didn't recognize, a small packet of peppers, onions, and at the bottom wrapped separately in oiled cloth. 6 dried potatoes with the eyes still intact, the kind you save through winter for replanting in spring. I sat down on the deck with the open barrel in front of me, and I didn't move for a long time. This wasn't food. Not directly. You can't eat a seed and live. But seeds are the thing food comes from. Seeds are the thing that gives you food forever instead of food today. Every fish I caught was a one-time meal. Every seed in this barrel, if I could grow it, was a meal that produced more meals after itself, season after season. The whole rest of my time on this raft just changed. I thought it through carefully before I touched anything else. There were 3 problems, and I needed to solve all of them, or none of this was going to work. Problem 1, soil. There was no soil on this raft. There was no soil within 1,000 kilometers. Probably plants need something to root into, and they need that something to hold water, and they need that something to feed them. I worked on this all afternoon. I gathered everything I had that might break down into something soil-like. Strips of seaweed I'd collected from earlier debris hauls and let dry in the sun. Fish guts and heads I'd been throwing overboard. I started keeping them instead in a wooden box, letting them rot down. Ash from the fire pit, which I'd been sweeping out and dumping until now. Rotted scraps of fabric and rope. Dust and grit from the bottoms of the empty barrels. Sand from the kitchen platform. I mixed all of it in a large box I built from spare planks. Crude, ugly, smelling of rotten fish and ash, but it was dark. It was heavy. It held water when I poured a little in to test it. It was the closest thing to soil I could make in the middle of the ocean. It would have to be enough. Problem 2, water. This was the hardest part. The desalinator made about 700 milliliters a day. I drank most of it. There was no surplus to pour onto plants. If I tried to water a garden the normal way, I'd have to choose between drinking and growing, and that's not a choice. I'd drink. The plants would die. Game over. I needed a system that used the absolute minimum amount of water, drop by drop, only where it was needed, with nothing wasted to evaporation or runoff. I sat on the kitchen platform with a piece of fabric in my hand and thought about it, and then I remembered something. When I was a kid, my grandmother had been sick for a long time, and I had watched her in the hospital with one of those slow IV drips going into her arm, a bag of fluid hanging from a hook, a thin tube running down, and at the bottom of the tube, the liquid moved drop by drop into her vein. Slow, steady, almost nothing per minute. But over hours, it added up to enough to keep her alive. I needed to do the same thing for the plants. I built it like this. I took a length of cotton fabric, thin, absorbent, the kind that pulls water along itself by capillary action. I dipped one end of the cotton into the collection crate of the desalinator where the fresh condensate pulled. I ran the other end of the cotton down to the soil box I'd built. The fabric soaked up water from the crate and carried it slowly along its length, and released it drop by drop into the soil at the other end. I tested it. I sat watching the cotton for a long time. After about 10 minutes, the far end started to darken with moisture. After 20 minutes, a single drop fell from the fabric into the soil. Then another, then another. It was working. The plants would get water without me losing my drinking supply. Problem 3, salt air. Even if I had soil and even if I had water, the air on this raft was poisoned to seeds. Salt spray killed plants. Wind dried them out. The sun was too direct and too strong. If I just laid out my soil box on an open part of the deck and planted seeds, every shoot would be dead within a day. I needed a greenhouse. I spent 2 full days building it. I built the frame from the thinnest, lightest planks I had, a square base about 2 meters by 2 meters with 4 corner posts standing about 1.5 meters tall. I lashed the joints with rope and reinforced them with nails from the chest. Then I stretched the largest piece of canvas I had over the top, and on the sides I used pieces of the cracked yellow plastic from the buoy, cut into flat panels, translucent enough to let some light through, solid enough to block the wind and the spray. It was ugly, lopsided. The canvas roof sagged in the middle, and the plastic walls didn't quite meet at the corners. I had to stuff the gaps with strips of cloth and old rope. But when I crawled inside it on the 3rd afternoon and sat there in the muted, warm, salt-free air, it felt like I had built a small cathedral. I planted the next morning. I made small holes in the soil with my finger. I dropped 2 tomato seeds into the first hole, 2 cucumber seeds into the second, beans into the 3rd row, spinach, daikon, the leafy green I didn't know. I covered each hole gently with my fingertips. I positioned the cotton drip line so water would reach every section of the box. I cut the potatoes carefully with the rusted knife, keeping each eye intact, and pressed them into a separate corner of the soil. Then I closed the canvas flap of the greenhouse and walked away because I knew if I sat there staring at the soil, it wasn't going to make anything grow faster. While the seeds did their slow work, I built other things. The shower, I made it on the back of the greenhouse. On the canvas roof, I built a second smaller solar desalinator, a flat tray of seawater under a sloped canvas, and I rigged it so the condensate flowed down a wooden channel into a sealed plastic crate suspended above head height. The crate had a small hole drilled in the bottom and a wooden peg jammed into the hole as a stopper. The first time I used it, I stood under the crate naked except for my shorts and pulled the peg. Water poured down through the perforated underside of the lid. Fresh water, slow trickle, not a real flow, but real clean, sun-warmed water running over my head and shoulders and down my back for the first time in over 2 weeks. I closed my eyes and stood there until the crate was empty. I'm not going to try to describe it. I'll just say that there are things you take for granted in your old life, and when you get them back after losing them, they stop being small. A shower stops being a shower. It becomes a kind of return, a small piece of being a person again. I dried off in the sun, put my shorts back on, and felt like a different man for the rest of the day. The bed. This took me an evening and a morning. I rebuilt the sleeping platform properly, a real frame this time. 4 heavy posts, planks across the top, joints reinforced. On the platform, I built a kind of mattress. A long sack made from 2 pieces of canvas sewn together with fishing line, stuffed with handfuls of dried seaweed I'd been collecting and letting bake in the sun. The seaweed was springy and held its shape. The mattress wasn't soft the way a real mattress is soft, but it wasn't a wooden plank either. It had give. It had warmth. I made a pillow the same way, a smaller canvas sack stuffed with folded cloth. That night I lay down on a real bed in a real shelter on a raft I had built with my own hands, and I cried just a little into the canvas pillow. Not from sadness, from something else, something I didn't have a word for. The kitchen upgraded. I built a small table next to the hearth, a flat plank on 4 short legs, and a stool, a single block of wood from a half barrel I'd cut down. I started eating my meals sitting at the table instead of crouching by the fire. Kim would hop up onto the opposite end of the table while I ate and watch me with that scowling face demanding her share. I always gave her a piece. We ate together, an old man and his bird on a raft in the middle of nowhere. The The days passed in a strange new rhythm. Fish in the morning, salvage and craft in the afternoon, tend the greenhouse before sunset, eat with Kame, sleep on a real bed. On the morning of the 4th day after planting, I opened the greenhouse to check the drip line, and I saw the first green, a tiny shoot, no bigger than my smallest fingernail, a pale, almost translucent green pushing up out of the dark soil in the bean row. I crouched in front of it and stared at it for a long time. A plant. A living plant on a raft in the middle of the ocean. By the end of the week, there were 9 of them. Beans mostly, and 2 tomato shoots, and a thin curl of something that might have been daikon. The potatoes hadn't shown anything above the soil yet, but when I gently pressed my finger into the dirt near one of them, I could feel the roots forming underneath. It was working. Kame had become the greenhouse's unofficial guardian. She'd taken to perching on the corner of the canvas roof every morning, scanning the inside of the greenhouse with one suspicious eye, daring any insect that didn't exist out here to come close to her plants. She had decided the greenhouse was hers. I didn't argue. 2 more weeks went by like this. The garden grew. The raft grew with it. I added another small expansion to the south side, building out about another meter in each direction just for the storage I now needed. I built a second smoking rack near the kitchen and started smoking fish properly, hanging them in long rows above the slow heat. Real food storage, a buffer against bad days. I had it all. Fire, fresh water, a shower, a bed, a garden, a companion, smoked fish hanging in the kitchen, a roof over my head, a routine. For a few days I let myself believe that this was sustainable, that if nothing changed I could live like this, quietly, carefully, fishing and gardening and tending my little floating home for a long time, maybe forever. Then, one morning, just after sunrise, the raft tilted. Not much, just a sudden lurch. Maybe 10 centimeters of rise on one side, the kind of motion you'd get if something very large had passed under the boards from below, close enough to push water out of the way. I dropped the fishing line I was holding and ran to the western edge. I got there just in time to see it. A back, a gray back, breaking the surface for one slow second before it slid under again. A fin standing up out of the water. Not the small triangular fin of the 1.5-meter shark from week 1. A tall fin, a wide fin, the base of it as thick as my arm. The body that the fin was attached to passed under the raft slowly. It took almost 3 seconds for it to go from the western edge to the eastern edge. The raft was 8 meters long. The thing under me was at least 5 meters. It surfaced once more on the far side, blew a slow exhale of air through whatever it had for a blowhole. No, sharks don't blow air. That was just water displacement. And then it sank into the dark blue and was gone. I stood at the edge of my raft and I did not move. Kim came down from the greenhouse roof and landed on the planks beside me. She made a low sound, not a rasp this time, a different sound, a worried sound. Yes, I said quietly. I saw it. I stood there for a long time after the water had gone calm again. The shark from week 1 had been a juvenile, a test, a scout. This was the real population of these waters. This was what my raft had been hiding from. The thing that had brushed against my boards in the night. The thing that had left grooves on my planking that hadn't been my one little juvenile shark. That had been this. And it knew where I was now. I looked back across my raft, my beautiful, fragile, growing raft, the greenhouse, the shower, the kitchen, the bed, clears throat, everything I'd built in these last weeks. All of it suspended on a few centimeters of wooden plank above a mouth that was 10 times bigger than me. One bite from that thing in the wrong place, and the entire western side of my home would be gone. The greenhouse would tilt into the sea. The garden would drown in seconds. The seeds I'd grown, every one of them would be lost. I didn't sleep well that night, or the night after, or the night after that. I started building the defensive stakes the next morning, but I already knew in some part of myself that had learned to trust bad feelings that I was not going to finish in time. For 3 days I lived in the shadow of that fin. I worked from sunrise to sunset on the defensive stakes. The plan was simple. Take the longest, heaviest planks I had, sharpen one end of each into a point with a rusted knife, and lash them to the underside of the raft so the points stuck outward and downward into the water. Anything that came at the boards from below would meet the points first. The work was slow. Each stake took me almost an hour to shape. The knife was dull, and the wood was hard, and my hands were already raw from the last 2 weeks of building. I could only attach the stakes from a sitting position at the edge of the raft, leaning out over the water to lash them into place. And every time I leaned out, I felt the back of my neck prickle with the certainty that something was about to come up out of the dark and take my arm off at the elbow. By the end of 3 days, I had finished 16 stakes, 6 on the western side, where I'd seen the back, 4 on the south, 3 each on the north and east. It wasn't a complete perimeter. The corners were still bare. The underside of the raft was still mostly exposed, but it was something. It wasn't enough. I knew it wasn't enough on the 3rd evening when I sat down by the kitchen fire to eat, and Kame wouldn't come to the table. She stayed on the greenhouse roof with her head turned toward the western horizon.